It's December 1st, the first day of the last month of a long year. December 1st has particular meaning in the Zen world. It's the beginning of what's called Rohatsu Sesshin. Sesshin, as most of you know, is a kind of intensive retreat. Sometimes it's a week, sometimes 5 days, sometimes maybe 3, where the schedule is fairly intense. When I was in the monastery, we would begin at 3 and finish at 9, and in the time in between, it was almost entirely zazen. There was a little bit of kinhin, there were 3 meals, but that was it. And there's a kind of simplicity to it, even beyond the ordinary monastic schedule, because the idea is to have as many people participating in the sesshin as possible. And so you get a kind of skeleton crew in the kitchen, and you tell the monk who would usually organize the bath, for example, you have the week off, no one's going to take a bath. The ceremonies are greatly simplified so that they're all done where everyone is seated. That way there's no organization to be done. It's all very minimal. Rohatsu Sesshin is, for many places, the kind of the center of the practice year. Rohatsu is the Sesshin that leads up to December 8th, which is recognized as the day of the Buddha's enlightenment. And so the idea is that you're sitting as Buddha for those 7 days, and on the morning of the 8th, just as the Buddha saw the morning star, on the morning of the 8th, you break. And in fact, in many temples, the night of the 7th and into the 8th, people sit all night. So after a week of sitting almost constantly, they get to the end of the last day and they just don't go to bed. Again, enacting this activity of the Buddha. It's really beautiful, and it's also, as I said, it's hard. And I think when we think about Sesshin, when we imagine that kind of retreat, when we think about that kind of container for practice, it's natural that we think about it primarily in terms of the meditation aspect. Because at the end of that week, you've sat for hours and hours and hours. And if you've ever done a retreat like that, you know that there is a cumulative effect from sitting a lot. Your sitting changes over the course of a week. That doesn't mean it necessarily changes permanently in your life, but there's a kind of grasping that I at least am capable of every Tuesday night, but that I might not be capable of if I've been sitting all day, every day for 3 days. Your brain can't play with the same toys anymore. It gets tired of it, and something else kind of opens up. And that can feel like you're going to a very deep place. It can feel like you're letting go. It can feel like, sometimes like, oh, I finally get it now. I see what this is, what Zazen is. And that's an experience I wish for anyone. And I hope that this community will eventually be in a position to offer that kind of experience. And at the same time, I think that if we imagine Sesshin in that way, if we imagine Rohatsu Sesshin in that way, we miss a kind of larger point, which is what I wanted to talk about tonight. That when we engage in that kind of practice, it isn't necessarily about meditation. Meditation is the form that it takes. Another way of understanding what's happening in that space is that we're taking up an act of renunciation. So what does that mean in this context? I was thinking today, as I was thinking about this talk, I was thinking about Lent. I have a fascination with Lent. I think it's a wonderful tradition. Many of my friends with whom I grew up are Catholic, and every year on Facebook they'll announce what they're going to do for Lent. You know, this year I'm giving up this year I'm giving up this. It's a really, it's an interesting place to explore. And as I understand it, the origins of Lent were in Jesus' 40 days in the desert. That for that period of Lent, there's a kind of remembrance of that act and an honoring of that act. And historically it was quite strict. There were lots of things you weren't supposed to do. And among them, you weren't supposed to indulge. You weren't supposed to kind of take up luxury. And you also weren't supposed to necessarily enjoy festivities. It was a simplified time. It was a more austere period. Now it's changed a little bit, for some at least, where you might choose the thing that feels like your vice, whatever that is. Maybe it's chocolate, or maybe it's Facebook, or whatever that is. And you say, well, for this period, I'm not going to touch that. It's a stepping away. That's a wonderful practice. In Zen, though, we do it a little bit differently, in that it isn't, first of all, it isn't an act of repentance, as Lent is. But second, it isn't something that we pick and choose. It's that we actually enter a space where everything is taken away from us at the door. The act of renunciation is in walking through that gate and agreeing that for this period, I'm going to wake up when the bell says wake up. And when there's another bell to sit down, I'm going to sit down. And when there's another bell, I'm going to stand up. And my agency essentially stops at that choice to go through the gate. Now I'm just fully present to what this demands. And while I'm there, I'm not going to get what I want. All my little comforts, the little things that feel good. I'm not going to bring a book. I'm not going to bring my phone. I'm not going to bring my favorite pillow. I'm going to dress as everyone else dresses. I'm going to eat what everyone else eats at the pace at which they eat. I'm going to sit still far beyond the point where it's comfortable for me to sit still. Because I've agreed to this. And in doing that, I'm going to feel the generosity of not clinging. There are different kinds of renunciation in this practice. I think about my wedding. My wedding was the first time that my teacher met my parents. And my mother had multiple sclerosis. My teacher didn't know that. And so when they first met, the first thing he noticed was that my mother had some trouble walking, trouble getting around. And he asked me, so, well, what's going on? I explained. And his first thing that he asked me was, well, what have you given up for her? And I said, well, what do you mean? And he said, well, she's suffering. There should be something that you give up. What's the thing that you've given up? Now, he didn't believe that my giving up, again, let's say chocolate, was going to help my mother. But he also understood that doing something like that speaks to a natural instinct that we have, a kind of instinct of solidarity. When we recognize someone else is lacking, when we recognize that someone else is suffering, we notice that maybe there's something we could let go of. I bumped into this when I was in college, and my best friends were having a child, and I was so excited for them. It was, they were the first friends of mine to have kids, and it felt kind of overwhelming for me. And part of that feeling of being overwhelmed was feeling that I didn't know what to offer this baby who was going to arrive. I wanted to give something. I wanted to do something to kind of improve the world that the baby was coming into. And I was reading a book about the beef industry and the problems around the beef industry, and so I gave up eating beef in advance of the baby being born. This was my first step toward being vegetarian. But for me, what was interesting about that was that these two things that seemed so unrelated, me giving up a certain thing that I ate, and this baby being born into the world, when I hit on this relationship between them, it seemed obvious. That me letting go of something doesn't have to be, there doesn't have to be a straight line between that and the person to whom I want to give. The letting go is enough. Now we're here in a pandemic, in a year when so many people have lost so much. And even for those of us who are the very luckiest, and I count myself among them, there are friends we don't get to see, family we don't get to visit, places we don't get to go. There's a sense of loss. And for others, that sense of loss is far more palpable and much deeper. So many people have lost so much this year. And it is natural in response to that, in response to this environment of feeling that something is slipping away, to grab onto the things that are comfortable. And in fact, I see articles going by all the time. They say, they say, eat that cheesecake, right? This is the wrong time to be beating yourself up about that, right? Don't be hard on yourself for indulging in this. Give yourself a break. Let yourself curl up on the sofa and feel all of this. And I have no argument with that. Sometimes that's what we need. But what I wanted to offer in the context of this day and this week is that it is never all of what we need. That in fact, in order for us to do this practice, specifically to take up this work as a bodhisattva, there has to be a leaning in sometimes to the letting go. If there isn't, then everything that seems to be slipping away is something that's taken from us. Sometimes we have to preempt that and offer something up. Say, I don't need this right now. I can do something that's hard. I can do something that is simple. I can cut a little bit closer to the bone. That's a kind of giving. As we enter this week, I want to offer up, and I know a few people in our community are actually participating in Rohatsu Sesshin in other communities, but for most of us, where this might, as you look ahead, it might look like just any other week. I want to offer a possibility that this week is not like any other week. That this week is an opportunity, again, in solidarity, not just with the other people who are doing this practice, but with all the people who have lost so much, to lean in a little bit You can decide for yourself if that's artificial or not. For me, it is not. Right? Make a soup. Make a lot of it. And then eat it every day for lunch. Choose a uniform for the week and wear it. Stay simple that way. Stay clear. If you're someone who hasn't been sitting with us in the morning, if it's possible, wake up a little bit earlier and sit. Start your day in that way, with sitting and with the vows. Make space for those opportunities to hear the bell and respond to the bell. Whether it's in the form of practice with this community, or in the form of service, or in the form of just holding back from doing that little bit extra. You can take a bath. But consider how this week you might find a different kind of schedule. Consider how this week is about a kind of resolve. You know, in the story of the Buddha, it's about a resolve not to stand up again until he had solved the great matter of suffering. Meet this week with resolute stability, whatever that looks like for you. You're in good company. I'll stop there.